Cope cages have a relatively short but uneventful history. What first started as a relatively unsuccessful attempt to try and protect the tanks has evolved to something much bigger. And a lot of people, myself included, have made a lot of wrong assumptions about these cages. So today, we will see why everyone was so wrong about them. And when looking for the truth, it is important to eliminate any biases, which is why I am proud to present today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that gathers related articles from more than 50,000 sources around the world in one place so you can compare how different outlets cover the same story. Every story comes with a clear breakdown of the political bias, ownership, and headlines of the sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. For example, the UK recently signed a new defense pact with Germany. Ground News found more than 31 sources covering this, with barely 6% coming from conservative outlets. So without intentionally diversifying how you stay up to date, you could have easily missed this important story. Ground News also shows me reporting is coming from around the world, with most based in the UK, ensuring on-the-ground perspective. And by comparing coverage, I can see just how where an outlet is based affects their article's framing. But a feature I really like is the blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. For example, if you lean left, you probably missed the story on IDF uncovering massive smuggling tunnel for vehicles on Gaza-Egypt border. And as someone deeply interested in the complexities of war, Ground News helps me cut through the noise by providing comprehensive reporting from diverse sources. It's essential for understanding such a nuanced issue. Go to ground.news/redeffect or use the link in the video description to subscribe today. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all their features. I think Ground News is doing important work, and I hope you'll check them out. In summer of 2021, Russian units of the Southern Military District received orders to equip their tanks with makeshift cages to protect the weak roof armor of their tanks. Well, the order didn't specify what the intent of the cages was, but that is what everyone assumed was the case, because at the time, Ukraine had just recently acquired Javelin ATGMs and started deploying them with their troops. Of course, the full-out invasion hadn't started yet at the time, but one could say it was one of the signs that it was coming. To prove that the cages were not effective and to probably make fun of Russians, Ukraine has released test footage where they mounted cage armor on top of a tank used as a target on a range, and, to no one's surprise, Javelin damaged the tank as if the cage was not there. This quickly earned the roof cages a nickname Cope Cage, whose use only increased with the invasion in February of 2022. Some people speculated that the cages might have been designed to prevent the mortars or drone-dropped ordnance from damaging or destroying the tank. But that was most definitely not the case originally. If they were worried about that, they would have also protected the engine deck, which has even less roof armor than the turret, which is also equipped with explosive reactive armor. It was pretty clear the intent was to protect against top attack munitions. But with javelins not being so common, and from the few instances where we do see them successfully engaging the tanks, they usually don't even hit at the area where the cage is supposed to be. So people started making fun of the cages even more. Deservedly so. And at the time, I and others thought that the Cope cages might be going out of fashion, since we started seeing them less and less on the battlefield. But oh boy was that a mistake. Not only did their use increase, they have evolved from a small umbrella-like cage on top of the turret to a full-on tanks encased with the cages. And the simple reason for that are drones. You see, when the invasion happened, drones were not that prominent. Sure, there were some here and there, but their use has drastically increased in the later half of 2022, and with that, the use of the cages has drastically increased as well. From that point, we have seen them start covering more and more of a tank, since, well, the original design barely covered much. Drones could easily slip in between the cage and the roof armor of the tank. But in my opinion, if it weren't for the original Cope cage, we wouldn't be seeing any of the improved designs either. We got some of the craziest cages on some of the tanks, like the one that had a lot of people convinced it was a tank with the new turret design, as well as the turtle tanks, the final form. We will talk a bit about them later. And since Russians also started using drones more and more, Ukrainians started adopting the Cope cages on their tanks as well. With the arrival of the Western tanks like Leopard 2s, Challenger 2s, and Abramses, it became evident that their roof armor kinda sucks a lot. So we started seeing the cages installed on them as well. I believe the first Western tank with the cope cage we saw was this Challenger 2, but I could be wrong. At first, Leopard 2 tanks did not have much, if any, cages on them, which didn't lead to that many losses to drones surprisingly. But Abrams's? Oh my, the lack of cages really did a number on them. Perhaps led by a false sense of security by the fact that not many Leopards were actually targeted by drones, we didn't see a single cage armor on any Abrams tank in their first major use. And that led to quite a bit of tanks being taken out by drones. This has led to Ukrainians now installing quite a lot of cages on their Abrams tanks, as well as placing a lot of explosive reactive armor on the places where it was originally not intended to be placed. Russians have even started installing the cages in factories, with designs that even integrate explosive reactive armor into the cages, but a lot of those designs are honestly not the best, especially because they are hindering the crew from leaving the vehicle quickly. But the latest design might be the weirdest one. Instead of actually covering the tanks in cages or wires, they installed rubber flaps. And keep in mind, this is factory made, not a field modification. They haven't really explained what the intent of this design is, but I believe it is intended to slow down the drone enough not to fuse, or divert it from hitting the intended place on the tank. Turtle tanks are probably the most outrageous use of the cages, if you can even call them cages, since most of them are covered with simple metal plates, or rather sheets. In my dedicated video on the turtle tanks, I explained that the probable intent behind them is to obstruct the view on the actual tank and prevent the drones from aiming at the weak spots on the tank. But the actual problem is that, well, you can't really use the tank effectively. The turret rotation is largely obstructed, visibility is severely limited, and overall this doesn't really increase the physical protection in any way, and in my opinion, something that Syrians did years ago with their T-72 Mahmia tanks would be much better, since the installed cages do not interfere with turret rotation or visibility from the tank. And one could argue that the Mahmia is sort of an origin of the cope cage idea. The new BTR recently presented on the Army Forum has the cage design which is really similar to what the Syrians did with their T-72s. Of course, the main problem with this design is actually escaping the tank, but not like you can do it easily in a turtle tank anyway. On top of Russians and Ukrainians adopting the cope cages, we have seen other nations like Israel adopt them in a small amount, since drones have started appearing everywhere in the world, mainly because of how cheap and easy to use they are. I believe that the name cope cage is no longer warranted. I'm pretty sure that by now everyone has realized that they do actually help. It is just that they don't really help against the thing they were, probably, originally designed against. But let me just say another thing that I might have to come back to and say I was wrong about 2 years later. I believe that cages will, in a couple of years, be completely ditched. Why? Well, because more and more systems are being developed to counter drones on the battlefield. I recently covered the newly designed German and French tanks that feature remote weapon stations with integrated radars that allow the remote weapon station to detect drones and lock onto them. There are active protection systems being developed to target drones specifically, and if anyone wants to actually adopt hard-kill active protection systems to protect their tanks, they can't have cages, because cages obstruct both the detection of incoming threats and deployment of countermeasures. Russia is also working on several different systems to counter drones, but I will cover that in a future video. For now, that is what I believe will happen, but I again could be completely wrong. That would be all. If you like my content, you can support me on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a nice day.